Well, the latest here in Baghdad is that the protesters have managed to retake half of two bridges here in the centre town that command the access to the green zone. That's the ultimate objective for most of these protesters, is to manage to get to the actual green zone, but it is heavily defended. Now, when we arrived here 10 days ago with my colleagues, the protesters were uniquely on Tahrir Square, and they were controlling access to one bridge, and that is a Jumeirah bridge. Now they're back in control of two more of these bridges, with indeed the police having withdrawn this weekend in front of these protesters. That there was some pretty severe rioting on Friday night here, and since, well, the protesters are controlling access to these two bridges.
James, you mentioned Tahrir Square in the centre of the city. You've been spending quite a bit of time there, I understand. What's the atmosphere there like?
Well, the atmosphere in Tahrir Square does seem to reflect the mood pretty much across the country. What we're seeing is that there are less people at the moment at Tahrir Square than there were slightly earlier, and the public has changed a little bit, less families. Now, this is due to the fact that there is a lot of paranoia, if you will, on Tahrir Square. We've seen the mood shift in the days we've been here. When we arrived, a lot of people were very eager and willing to come on camera, but that has slightly changed. We still have activists, of course, who want to come on camera, but a lot of people are telling us they do not want to be filmed. That was just a couple of days ago. They were telling us that they prefer not to go on camera. They say, look, we don't want to speak on there because we're afraid. We've had threats. Some people were telling us that they wouldn't even go on air with masks, for example, because they say there are spies on the square. Well, indeed, there are a lot of claims of threats. For example, some people were telling us about abductions. Lots of activists say that people they know have been abducted, but there are widespread allegations that people have indeed received messages, been called, been talked to in the protest. Same thing about one of the medical students telling us that, well, she'd heard of people dressing up of doctors and coming to stab the people helping the protesters in the night. Now, obviously, these are all rumors. They're very difficult to check upon. For example, when we asked to meet some people who had this stabbing problem, well, no one could give us any names or point us in any directions. They just said they'd heard it had happened. And it does appear that the authorities here are playing a game of intimidations and just letting this movement rot for the time being. They're letting the protesters move towards the centre of Baghdad, retake the bridges, and then pushing them back. This is what we've been seeing, and it does appear this is the game at the moment, with an objective which is to reduce violence. We have seen, of course, some people have been killed over the past 10 days on Tahrir Square, but relatively few. We have not heard some live fire being used. We have seen, of course, a lot of tear gas being used, and pretty brutal tear gas at that, but it does seem that the authorities are trying to show restraint as far as violence is concerned, compared to what happened at the beginning of the movement. But indeed, it does seem that it is much more of a waiting game now as far as police is concerned.